There's a certain kind of pain that comes from realizing the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. I learned this the hard way when I married into a family that, from the outside, looked normal, loving, even. But beneath the surface there was something much darker. My name is Emily, and for years I fought a battle I never signed up for. A battle not with a stranger, not with a rival, but with my own husband's family, his mother and sister, to be exact. I didn't realize it at first, of course. When I met Jacob, he was charming, kind, and deeply loyal. The kind of man who'd give you the shirt off his back without a second thought. But what I didn't understand at the time was that his loyalty had been weaponized against him since the day he was born. Jacob was the golden child, the pride and joy of his mother, Margaret. His sister Sarah wasn't treated the same way. She had always been second best in their mother's eyes, a shadow standing beside the bright light that was Jacob. And while Jacob did his best to make up for the love Sarah never received, she didn't resent their mother. She resented me. At first, I thought Sarah was just overly attached to her brother. She would barge into his room unannounced, interrupt our conversations, and even act strangely possessive when I was around. I chalked it up to sibling closeness, but things took a turn when Jacob and I got engaged. That's when I realized I wasn't just marrying Jacob. I was walking straight into a war zone. Margaret and Sarah saw me as an outsider, a threat to their control over Jacob. They ignored me at family gatherings, made backhanded comments about my upbringing, and even tried to convince Jacob to leave me. But nothing prepared me for the final betrayal, when they demanded that we give up our own home so Sarah, her unemployed husband, and their 6 kids could move in. It was the last straw, and for the first time in his life, Jacob finally chose me over them. This is the story of how I stood my ground, fought for my marriage, and watched as my husband finally cut ties with the 2 people who had controlled his life for far too long. If you've ever dealt with toxic in-laws, grab a cup of coffee, because this one's going to hit home. I should have seen the warning signs earlier. They were there, clear as day. But love has a funny way of making you ignore the red flags waving in your face. From the moment I stepped into Jacob's life, his sister Sarah acted like I was trespassing on her property. At first I brushed it off as typical sibling protectiveness, but there was something off about the way she behaved. It wasn't just overprotectiveness, it was possession. Back when Jacob and I were just dating, he was living with his parents. They had given him the entire upstairs level to himself, allowing him to have privacy as a young adult. Naturally, that meant I would sometimes stay over. What I didn't expect was to have an uninvited audience in the mornings. The first time it happened, I was half asleep when the bedroom door suddenly swung open. Before I could even process what was happening, Sarah waltzed in. No knock, no hesitation, just stormed into the room like she owned it, and to make things worse, I wasn't exactly fully dressed, I yelped, pulling the blanket over myself, but Sarah didn't even flinch. She completely ignored my presence and started chatting with Jacob as if nothing was out of the ordinary. It wasn't an emergency. She wasn't there to warn him about some crisis. No, she wanted to talk about a TV show she had been watching. Jacob, groggy and confused, told her to leave. But Sarah just rolled her eyes, shot me a dirty look, and continued talking. I waited for her to leave, my face burning with embarrassment, before I turned to Jacob and said, "Please tell me this isn't normal." He sighed. "She's always been like this." That's when I knew. This wasn't a one-time thing. I told Jacob that if I was going to continue coming over, he needed to install a lock on his door. He agreed, not thinking much of it. But Sarah? Oh, she took it personally. The very next morning, she stormed up the stairs, jiggled the doorknob, and when she realized it was locked, she lost her mind. "Jacob, open this door right now," she screamed, pounding her fists against the wood. Jacob hesitated but eventually opened it, probably thinking something was wrong. But the moment Sarah stepped inside and saw me in bed, she turned to her brother, eyes blazing with fury. and hissed, "Did you put this lock because of her?" And then, as if I wasn't even a person standing right there, she spat out, "You're letting this skank come between us?" I was too shocked to even respond. Skank? For what? Wanting basic privacy? Jacob, bless him, tried to defuse the situation. He told her that the lock wasn't about secrets. It was about boundaries. But Sarah wouldn't hear it. She stormed out, slamming the door so hard that the walls shook. Later that week, she gave me a half-hearted, muttered apology. "I just needed to talk to Jacob," she said. I wasn't thinking, but I wasn't convinced. Something in her tone told me she wasn't sorry for what she said. She was just sorry that Jacob had defended me. As Jacob and I got more serious, Sarah's tactics changed. Instead of outright hostility, she started taking little jabs at me when we were alone. "You know, Jacob's ex was so much prettier than you. Are you sure you and Jacob are right for each other? He likes action movies, and you like romantic comedies. Maybe you should be with someone more like you. Your ex dumped you, right? Why? Were you not a good girlfriend?" It was like she was testing me, waiting to see if I'd snap. At first I ignored her, but one day I had enough. She had just finished making yet another snide remark about Jacob's ex being way out of my league when I turned to her and said, "You know what? I actually liked my ex-boyfriend's family more than Jacob's. They weren't so nosy." The look on her face, priceless. For the first time since I'd met her, Sarah was speechless. I had stood up for myself and she wasn't expecting it, but if I thought that was the end of it, I was dead wrong. Because as bad as Sarah was, Jacob's mother was worse, and she wasn't just playing games. She wanted me gone. If I had any doubts that my mother-in-law, Margaret, saw me as a threat, they were erased the moment Jacob proposed to me. That was the day the silent hostility turned into an all-out war. Jacob had planned a beautiful, intimate proposal, just the two of us at our favorite hiking spot. It was perfect. But the moment his mother and sister found out, they called me, both of them. Margaret went first, her voice dripping with disappointment. "Emily, I don't think this is a good idea." Sarah followed right after, her tone even nastier. "Just give the ring back. You're not the right person for Jacob." I could feel my heart pounding as I held the phone. "I love Jacob," I said firmly, "and he loves me." But that wasn't enough for them. Margaret sighed dramatically. "Sweetheart, you don't understand. Jacob is special. He needs someone who can take care of him the way I have all these years." Sarah, meanwhile, went straight for insults. "You're just with him for money. You're a gold digger, and you know it." A gold digger? I had a full-time job and paid my own bills. Meanwhile, Sarah had never worked a real job in her life and was dating a man who refused to support their kids. The irony was almost laughable. Hung up. There was no reasoning with them. Jacob, to his credit, was furious when I told him what they had said. "They don't get to decide who I marry," he snapped. And yet, he still wanted to give them a chance to come around. We had planned to pay for our own wedding, every last cent of it. We wanted it to be our day, free from any outside control. But Margaret, desperate to insert herself, insisted on hosting the rehearsal dinner. "It's the least I can do," she said sweetly. I should have known better. When we arrived at the venue, my jaw nearly hit the floor. Plastic tablecloths, cheap, folding chairs. And the food. Cold Mexican takeout. I wasn't expecting a 5-star meal, but this was sabotage. Margaret, meanwhile, had already downed 3 glasses of wine. As the night went on, she got louder and louder, complaining about how stressful the wedding had been for her. Stressful for her? She hadn't lifted a finger to help. Jacob was embarrassed, but it wasn't until his father, Phil, finally lost his patience and escorted her out that the night ended. And then there was Sarah. A few nights before the wedding, Sarah invited Jacob and me to dinner. She was calm, too calm. I should have known she was up to something. Halfway through the meal, she turned to me and said, "How does it feel to be a worthless piece of trash?" Jacob. And I stared at her, stunned. Then, with a smug smile, she pulled out her phone and started waving pictures in front of Jacob's face. Photos of me. With my co-worker, Zach. Her voice was dripping with fake sympathy. "I caught Emily cheating. I'm just trying to protect you, Jacob." For a moment, the air was completely still. Then I grabbed the phone out of her hands and actually looked at the pictures. It was me and Zach at work, sitting in the break room. Nothing inappropriate, just two co-workers laughing over coffee. Sarah, however, had twisted the story into something ugly and vile. I looked at Jacob, begging him to see through the lie, and he did. Jacob turned to his sister, his voice dangerously calm. "Were you following Emily?" Sarah scoffed. "I was just looking out for you." "You stalked my fiancé." Sarah's face paled. I should call the police." Sarah's smugness disappeared in an instant. "You wouldn't." I crossed my arms. "Try me." Sarah looked to Jacob, waiting for him to take her side. But for the first time, he didn't. He stood up, threw cash on the table, and said the 4 words that finally shut her up. "We're done, Sarah." That was the last time I spoke to her. But unfortunately, his mother wasn't finished yet. For a few years after the wedding, life was peaceful. No drama, no manipulation, no Sarah, no Margaret. Jacob and I focused on building our life together. We worked hard, saved every penny, and finally, we bought our first home. It wasn't a mansion, but it was ours, a symbol of everything we had fought for. We thought we were free. Then Margaret called. It had been years since I had heard Margaret's voice. So when she called me out of the blue, I was immediately on edge. "Emily, darling," she said sweetly, too sweetly. "It's been so long. How are you? I didn't buy it. This woman hadn't spoken to me since my wedding day, but I played along." "I'm doing well, Margaret. How about you?" She sighed dramatically. "Oh, just getting by. Life is hard these days." And then, casually, she dropped it. "How does it feel, living in such a big house with just you and Jacob?" I stiffened. Jacob and I had been struggling with infertility for years. We had come to terms with the fact that we might never have children. But Margaret's question? That wasn't innocent. That was a knife aimed straight at my heart. Before I could respond, she continued. "Sarah is pregnant again, you know." I swallowed my anger. "I didn't know that." "6th child," she added with a chuckle. "Her husband is still struggling, of course. Poor thing just can't seem to find work." Of course he couldn't. That lazy, jobless man-child had never worked a day in his life, and then came the bombshell. That's actually why I called. Sarah and her husband need a bigger place to live. And I thought, since it's just you and Jacob in that house, maybe you two could give it to them. I almost dropped my phone. "Excuse me?" She sighed like I was the unreasonable one. "Sarah has a growing family. You and Jacob don't have kids. It's only fair." I was so stunned I actually laughed. This woman was insane. "No, Margaret," I said firmly. "That's not happening." And that's when she lost it. She started screaming, accusing me of being selfish. "You're a terrible daughter-in-law. A good wife would know how to take care of her husband's family. Sarah is struggling, and you have all that space for nothing." I let her rant. Then, when she finally paused for breath, I said, "If Sarah and her husband need a house so badly, why don't you let them move in with you?" Silence. Then, a nervous chuckle. "Well, you see, our house isn't very big. Neither is ours. But at least Jacob and I worked for it." That's when she dropped her final trick. "Oh, but Jacob already agreed to it." I froze. That was a lie. Jacob and I had always been on the same page. He would never make such a huge decision without talking to me first. "You're lying," I said coldly. She gasped. "I am not. He told me—" "Jacob is out of town. I cut in, and he would have told me if he agreed to something like this. She tried to backpedal, but I had caught her in the lie. I took a deep breath. Listen, Margaret, if Sarah and her husband want to stay here, they can pay half the mortgage. Otherwise, this conversation is over. She exploded. How dare you? Ask me to pay your mortgage? That's absurd. Oh, and yet it's not absurd to ask Jacob and me to give up our home for freeloaders? She kept screaming, but I was done. I calmly said, "Goodbye, Margaret," and hung up. Not even 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. Sarah. The moment I picked up, she was already yelling. "You had no right to ask my mother to pay your mortgage. How dare you?" I smirked. How? Dare you try to steal our house? She gasped. We're not stealing it, we just need help. No, Sarah. What you need is a job. That shut her up. You and your husband are both able-bodied adults, I continued. Instead of expecting other people to take care of you, how about taking care of yourselves? Sarah's voice turned whiny. But we have kids. That's not my problem. Then she threw out her favorite insult. You're a gold digger. You don't even deserve Jacob. I knew you were trouble from the start. I laughed. Oh, Sarah, if I'm a gold digger, then what does that make you? I said sweetly. Because last time I checked, you're the one trying to move into someone else's house for free. Silence. Then a furious click as she hung up. 3 days later, Jacob came home. The moment he walked through the door, I told him everything. His reaction? Pure fury. They tried to manipulate you while I was gone, he growled. I nodded. And they lied about you agreeing to it. That was the last straw. Jacob picked up his phone and called his mother. Why did you lie to Emily? He asked, voice cold. Margaret immediately tried to play innocent. I didn't lie. I just assumed you would agree because Sarah needs help. You assumed? He cut in. You didn't even ask me. She hesitated. Well, no, but I knew you'd. Want to help your sister? Stop! Jacob's voice was like ice. I've let you push me around my whole life. I let you and Sarah treat Emily terribly. But this is the last time. Margaret gasped. Jacob, you don't mean that. I do, he said firmly. I'm done. I don't want anything to do with you or Sarah anymore. You've disrespected my wife, tried to ruin my marriage, and now you tried to steal our home. I'm done. She started crying, begging. Jacob didn't care. He hung up. Since that day, he hasn't spoken to either of them. A week later, Margaret and Sarah showed up at our house. They banged on the door, screaming for Jacob. I answered, but I didn't let them inside. If you have something to say, say it from out there. Margaret started sobbing. Sarah started yelling. Jacob pulled up in the driveway, stepped out of his car, and didn't even hesitate. Leave. Jacob, please. If you ever come here again, we're calling the police. Margaret collapsed in tears. Sarah was furious, but Jacob put his arm around me and walked us inside. Without looking back, we changed our locks. We installed security cameras. And just like that, we were finally free. For years, they controlled him, manipulated him. Guilt tripped him. But in the end, he chose me. And I've never been prouder of him. Looking back, I realized something. We were never just fighting for our house. This wasn't just about Sarah's ridiculous demand or Margaret's manipulation. This was about control. About a family that believed they had the right to dictate Jacob's life, even after he built a life of his own. For years, they pushed him, tested him, guilted him. And for years, Jacob tried to keep the peace. Because that's what he had been trained to do. But in the end, he chose himself. He chose us. It wasn't easy for him. Cutting off family, even toxic family, is never easy. But I saw something in him change the moment we shut that door on them for the last time. Relief. For the first time in his life, he wasn't living under their control. He was free. And so was I. So if you're out there, dealing with toxic in-laws, manipulative family members, or people who think they have the right to walk all over you, remember this. You don't owe anyone your peace. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. And most of all, you are allowed to walk away. Because at the end of the day, family isn't about blood. It's about love. And if they don't love you enough to respect you, they don't deserve a place in your life. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more real-life stories just like this. And if you've ever dealt with a toxic family member, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your experiences. Until next time, take care and protect your peace.